Hi, friends. Welcome to the Bible Project Daily Podcast as we continue our journey together through the whole Bible, chapter by chapter, verse by verse. Welcome today as we continue through the Gospel of Luke. Verses we're going to be covering today, picking up where we left off last time, verses 35 through 59. And the question I'm asking today is, are you ready? Now, you may, response to that be ready for what? That seems fair enough. Are you ready for, what is it, next week's party? Next year's vacation? Ready for what? Well, it seems to me that we're always in the process of getting ready for something. And Jesus told us that we need to be ready, get ready. But he didn't put it in the form of a question. He talked about that and put it in the form of a couple of parables, which in themselves told us how important it is to be ready. So let's find out together today what Jesus said, what we need to do, how we need to be in order to be ready, and ready for what. So let's find out together as we continue our journey through the Gospel of Luke. Welcome to the Bible Project Daily Podcast. Okay, friends, hello again. Welcome. We've got quite a lengthy passage of scripture today, so rather than reading the whole thing in one go, I'm going to break it down into bite-sized chunks, into 4 or 5 sections, which I'll read, then work through it verse by verse, and then we'll try and pull the whole thing together at the end, as is what I usually do. So welcome, and let's pick up where we left off yesterday. The very next verse, Luke chapter 12, verses 35 to 40, and this is what we have. And it says, "Be dressed, ready for service, and keep your lamps burning, like servants waiting for their masters to return from a wedding banquet, so that when he comes and knocks, they can immediately open the door for him. It will be good for those servants whose master finds them watching when he comes. Truly I tell you, he will dress himself to serve, will have them recline at the table, and will come and wait on them. It will be good for those servants whose master finds them ready, even if he comes in the middle of the night or towards daybreak. But understand this, if the owner of the house had known what hour the thief was coming, he would not have let his house be broken into. You also must be ready, because the Son of Man will come at an hour when you do not expect him." Now, the key idea in this parable is the concept of waiting and watching. Well, is there a difference between those two things? Well, if there is, what is that difference? Well, obviously you can wait, and how you wait can vary. You can just wait and be irritated. Or you could wait and watch and be excited. Maybe the watching conveys an attitude of eager anticipation of the master coming back. So more than that, more than just doing that thing singly, but the call here by Jesus is to do both together, watch and wait at the same time. At the age of about 15, me and my family moved to an area of the coast in Northern Ireland. We'd previously lived near Belfast, which is the capital city of the province, and we moved to a place called Bangor, which was an area called the Ards Peninsula. And it was a promontory of land which has several fishing towns and villages located all the way around the coastline. Places with great names like, well, there was Bangor where I live, but places like Groomsport, Donaghadee, Ballywalter, Ballyhalbert, Portavogie, Portaferry. Now, I knew quite a few fishermen who made their living on the couple of trawler, on the sort of the little groups of trawlers, the little mini fleets of trawlers that worked that coastline, particularly those that worked a few that sailed out of the little village called Groomsport. Now, a conversation I had with a friend of mine illustrates the difference between waiting and watching. He began as an apprentice trawlerman, probably about the age of 17, and he tells the story about how his fellow older trawlermen, all of them married fishermen, used to view the catalogue of the various young girlfriends that he went through during his time of training with them. And they said that if he wanted to have a girlfriend who was a keeper, that he should have one that watched, not one that just waited. You see, the fishing boats at that time in the mid 70s, they used to go out to sea for anything from 3 to sometimes 11 or more days. And after returning to shore, on their way back, they would message the local coast guard, usually when they were about 6 miles out, which was about 1 to 2 hours away, saying that they were coming in, and the wives and girlfriends would gather on the quayside. Now, as they neared the shore, the sailors would be gazing naturally towards the docks and see the little dots of people waiting at the end of the jetty. And this is where the loved ones gathered. And aboard the boat, the skipper would look through his binoculars and identify to some of the crew. And he'd say, I can see so and so's wife. And there's David's, there's Bill's. And then, oh, yeah, yeah, Tom, there's your wife. Now, our friend, he had a series of girlfriends. And when he came home, the one he was with at that time wasn't waiting by the dock. Instead, she would just wait in her house up the hill further above the village. And he would get ashore, go up to see her, and she would open the door and welcome him and give him a kiss and a hug and say, nice to see you back. I've been waiting for you. The advice for his fellow fishermen was, she's not a keeper. You should choose someone who watches for you, not just someone who waits for you. Anyway, back to the text. By the way, the Jews at this time divided this night, their night time of waiting and watching, into what were called 3 watches. The Romans actually had 4, but anyway, the Jewish watch, there was 3 during the night, and the second watch was from 9 in the evening to midnight, and the third watch was from midnight to 3. So what is happening here is declared as happening in the first watch. Well, what's the point here? The point is that if you're a wise servant, this parable is saying that you should not just be waiting, that you should be watching as well. You should be waiting and watching eagerly for the master's return. And when he comes, if you're doing this, then it declares he will honor you. So the wise servant, as described in this passage, gets bestowed with honor because he's been waiting and watching for the master. Now, Jesus continues this narrative here, and in verse 39, he says, but now he's going to change the imagery that he's using a little bit, and he says, well, if the master of the house had known what hour the thief would come, he would have watched and not allowed the house to be broken into. In other words, he's saying, all right, you're waiting and you're watching, but you don't know at what point the master will come. And maybe you should consider it like a thief in the night. You should be ready for the unexpected, which is where he picks up in the parable of verse 40. And he says, he expands this to say, be ready, for the Son of Man is coming, also at an hour you will not expect. Let me read it for you. Peter asked, Lord, are you telling the parable to us or to everyone? The Lord answered then, well, who then is the faithful servant and wise manager? The one whom the master put in charge of his servants to give them their food allowance at the proper time. It will be good for that servant who the master finds doing so when he returns. Truly I tell you, he will put him in charge of all his possessions. But suppose the servant says to himself, my master's taking a long time in coming, and then he begins to beat the other servants, both men and women, and to eat and drink and get drunk. The master of the servant will come on a day, and when he does not expect him, and at an hour that does not expect him, and when he was not aware of it, and he will cut him into pieces and assign him a place with the unbelievers. Now, it's worth mentioning, first of all, that Peter pops up immediately at the beginning of this section and says, Lord, are you talking to us, your disciples, or are you talking to everybody? And the Lord says in verse 42, who then is the faithful and wise servant, who the Lord will make ruler of his household, to give them the portion of food in their season? Blessed is the servant whom his master will find watching and waiting on the day he comes. So the wise servant we saw in the first section was waiting and watching, and in the meantime he busied himself about the work of his master. He's doing what the master told him to do. He's actually working. Now, if we're in that category, and we've got a couple more that are coming as we've just revealed in the passages that follow, if you're in the wise category and you're doing that, you're watching, waiting, and working, serving in the world, serving God's people, then you're going to be honored when the master comes. But there's more. He says the master will make you ruler over his household. He will make you ruler over all that he has. So in a sense, there's going to be a sense of authority and blessing here, and you're going to be honored. You're going to be given a position of authority in the kingdom to come when the Lord comes back, but only if you're this first revealed wise servant in the first passage. And what is the wise servant like? He's someone who simply waits and watches, and while he's doing that, he works. All right, so that's the first servant. Therefore, be ready, it says, because the Son of Man is coming, and you don't know the hour at which to expect him. Then the Lord says, but if that servant, the servant who's been left behind, well, says my master's delayed in coming, so he's changing the focus here to a different type of service, how this servant responds to the call of God in their life. And he, instead of serving and working amongst the other servants, begins to beat up the other servants, and he begins to forget about those things and just eat and get drunk and be merry. The master of the servant, of course, will come one day, and he'll arrive at the time when this guy's not expecting it, when he's not aware of it, and it says he will cut him in two and appoint him with a portion with the unbelievers. Okay, very big contrast here. The first servant is the wise servant. The second servant in this passage is called, shall we say, and some do call him this in some of the titles given to sections in some Bible translations, he's called the wicked servant. So who is the wicked servant? Well, he's defined that way based upon what he does. He is seen, rather than take stewardship and responsibility and care of other people, he abuses that position of power. He's a bit like the hireling shepherd described elsewhere by Jesus in another parable. This guy just abuses people and gets drunk. And it says what happens to him. Wow. He gets cut in pieces and appointed, and a portion appointed with the unbelievers. Now, please note that this guy is referred to as a servant. So at no point is he actually called an unbeliever. It seems he is a believer because of his description as a servant. In fact, if you look at verse 45, it says that he refers to the one he serves as my master. So he recognizes the master. As a matter of fact, he also not only recognizes, he also believes and knows that the master will one day come back. So here is a servant who believes the Lord, believes, if we were to extrapolate it out today's thinking, he's actually someone who believes even in the second coming. And for that basis, I believe that his starting point is clearly that of a believer. That's his description. So you say, well, how can you say that when, what he's doing here in this passage? Well, let's just look at what he does. He begins to abuse the male and female servants, and he begins to sort of spend his time eating, drinking, wasting it, in this case, getting drunk. Now, do you think this is to be taken literally, that he literally took out a whip and beat people up? He may very well have, but I think I'm also going to suggest that this is a little more figurative, particularly as it's revealed in the verses that follow. I think he's meant to stand for the picture of a servant who mistreats other servants by misleading them or taking advantage of his position. And if you forgive me for saying that, I have seen that and heard of that among some pastors, some quite senior pastors who've mistreated other people who serve in the church or the church community that they have authority, shall we say, over. So not only is this a picture of someone mistreating other believers, but it's someone who's choosing very clearly, when you approach it from a parabolic point of view, that it's someone who's just choosing to live for himself, get what he can out of it. This guy's seen to eat and drink, even get drunk. And of course, the question that we to ask, is it possible that a believer can do such things? And sadly, the truth is, of course it's possible. All right, then how do you explain what happens in verse 46? It says, the master will come on a day when he's not looking for him, in an hour when he's not aware, and he will cut him in two. What does that mean? What does that tell us? Well, by the way, the cutting in two, is it literal? Well, I don't think it is. Because if you actually read on in the passage, post this event, this intervention by God, he's still seen alive in the rest of the verse that follows. It says he's going to be cut in two, and then he's going to be appoint his portion. In other words, the ramification of what he's done, it's going to be appointed with the unbelievers. He's going to suffer the consequences in exactly the same way as unbelievers would in this life. The proof positive is the fact that he's appointed with the unbelievers. Now, the Greek word translated unbelievers here is sometimes, some Bible experts would say, is a bit of a mistranslation where it leads people to reach the wrong conclusion about this. It is actually translated in some of the older and better translations as he is appointed as being among the unfaithful, which I think gives us more of a nuance here. So if we back up on the passage where it says in verse 42, we're talking about a faithful servant, a wise servant who is a faithful servant. What we're talking about here, this guy who's defined as a foolish servant, is the fact that yes, he's a believer, but he's an unfaithful servant to the master. He's not faithfully living out the life that he should be. So I submit to you that this guy, this servant, albeit unfaithful servant, he is a believer, and what's happening to him and is going to happen to him is being described using figurative language. He's going to get his portion. He's going to have the consequences fall in this life, that's for sure. And that means that what he will experience in this life will effectively be no different than those who don't even believe. So in other words, he's not going to fare very well. All right, there's another type of person, which is revealed in verse 47, another type of servant. So it's the same scenario each time, but each time illustrating how people respond differently as servants to that scenario. So let's pick it up in verse 47. The servant who knows the master's will and does not get ready or does not do what the master wants will be beaten with many blows. But the one who does not know and does things deserving of punishment will be beaten with few blows. For everyone who has been given much, much will be demanded, and from the one who has been entrusted with much, much more will be asked. So he'll be beaten, and actually the term used is given many stripes. Perhaps this is just an extension of what the wicked servant is, but based on the fact that there seems to be two different punishments apportioned here, it suggests two different people. So I'm clearly suggesting that this third section refers to a third type of servant, a third type of way we can respond to the responsibility that we have in this world of serving God. And this guy I'm going to call the wayward servant, because in this guy in verse 47, again, he knows the master's will, but he's not prepared to do anything or to live in any way according to the master's will. He's not certainly not the faithful servant. He's not even like the disobedient servant. He's just the one who goes completely his own way. He's not just like the unfaithful servant. He is in fact a disobedient servant who simply chooses to go his own way in life. So this number 3 guy gets beaten with many stripes, it says. What I believe is being talked and referred to here is specifically talking about this thing called the judgment seat of Christ, the place where believers are going to appear. And it's for him, because of the life he's lived. Yes, he's a believer, so he's going to be judged at the judgment seat of Christ for his life in this world. He's not going to face the great white throne judgment, but this is a guy who at some point was a believer and has lived a life that is wayward completely. And for him, well, how can I describe it? That meeting with the Lord is certainly not going to be a Sunday school picnic for him. I think it says that for him, what he's going to experience is sorrow and pain when he stands before the Lord at the judgment seat of Christ. You see, friends, there are many verses across the New Testament that say that even as believers, we're going to one day stand before the Lord and give an account of the Christian life we lived. And that there is going to be, based on how we lived that life, some sort of conscious awareness of reward or loss of reward awaiting us there. You can be honored, or you can be elevated, or you can be in a position where you won't receive any of that commendation or receive any of the rewards that you could have received if you lived your life in a different way. So in this passage, there has been a wise servant, one who took the commission and who worked, a wicked servant who knew what to do and didn't do, and then this guy is pretty much a worthless servant who neither did nor cared about what he should do after he initially had come to know the Lord. So I want you to notice that there's a couple of things very important to pick up a little bit. Number one, that there are degrees of punishment awaiting those who have lived or not lived their lives in terms of serving the Lord. And number two is there are also degrees of reward awaiting us, not only at the judgment seat of Christ, but in heaven itself. That's what this passage, I believe, is teaching. So it tells me that the afterlife is not just all about going to heaven and floating around in the crowd somewhere. There are some sort of system of rewards in heaven that are apportioned after we give our account or called to get to enter after we are called to give an account of the way we have chosen to live our lives. And the second thing I want you to notice is it's reminding us that to whom much is given, much is required. That was the statement in verse 48. For everyone to whom much is given, much is required. So within that, we have to accept that there is a degree of personal responsibility and accountability once we have been blessed with an insight that God has revealed himself to us and we've responded to it. So the basic point of this whole passage is that the Lord is coming. And the question is, are you ready? And then it unpacks for us what will happen to us depends on what kind of servant we've been, how we've responded to the knowledge of who Jesus is. If you're a wise servant, well, you're going to watch, you're going to wait, and you're going to serve. But if you're this guy we've called the wicked servant, then God's revealed himself to you, but fundamentally you're still living for yourself. And by nature, instead of serving other people, you're mistreating other people. But if you're a wayward servant, you know you're not going to be ready. You're going to remain worthless in your life of service. You're not even going to bother to try and find out what God wants to do in your life. So the question that this parable arises in these three sections is not only are you ready, but what kind of servant are you? Are you the type of servant who's ready to face the Lord, one who's ready to stand before him and give account of your stewardship of all that he has given and revealed to you? So that's the first part, the main part of the passage. But there's more text we're covering today. Let me just read verses 49 to 53. Remember, this is Jesus speaking. I have come to bring fire on earth, and how I wish it were already kindled. but I have a baptism to undergo, and what constraint I am under until it is completed. Do you think I come to bring priests on earth? No, I tell you, division. From now on there will be 5 in one family divided against each other, 3 and 2, 2 against 3. There will be divided father against son and son against father, mother against daughter and daughter against mother, mother-in-law against daughter-in-law and daughter-in-law against mother-in-law. You get the picture. The fire in the Bible is repeatedly used as an image and idea of judgment. So I'm suggesting to you that in the first part of the passage, we were told we need to be ready, ready for the Lord to come back. But embedded in this teaching now, it is implied that when he comes back, we are going to have to give an account. And now he states, well, I have to say it like this, you need to be ready because at this judgment, the thing you need to be ready for is division and fire. Now, everyone agrees that the baptism referred to in this passage, Jesus is referring to his own death, the fact that he's going to die on the cross. One way to tie all these verses together and with the previous section is to recognize they fit around the outworking of the consequences of being ready or otherwise. Though I think he's saying the thing that we ultimately need to be ready for, friends, here is this thing called the second coming. That's why he's discussing the different types of servants. I think he's saying, look, you need to understand that the thing you need to be ready for is judgments. It's not, because at that judgment, of course, there's going to be a weighing and apportioning. So he's saying you need to be ready for that division of earthly souls to begin to apply. And you, based on whether you're a wise servant, a faithful servant, an unfaithful servant, or a wicked servant, that's the basis of how that division is going to bring. Now, overall, he's saying, I came to bring peace on earth. But he doesn't talk here about at this time, bringing universal peace. The first time Jesus comes, he brings the potential for personal peace with God. But the second time, he says, when he returns, he's going to bring peace on earth. So in the meantime, until all of this is established through the return of Christ and the setting up of the kingdom, he says, if you follow me, then that's the basis on which that division is going to be made between those who achieve that spiritual peace with God in this time and those who reject it, and ultimately those who will experience it eternally in the fullness of time when Christ returns. And then he lays it out for us in an example format. He talks about the people being divided, and he personalizes that by making people realize that this will even apply within families, in the sense that even families are going to be split into groups. He specifically mentions the family relationships and how some will fall on one side of this judgment and some on the other, a judgment as in a weighing up of their life. Now, all of this, of course, sounds pretty heavy, but the point here is that the division is going to come, and it is even going to cut across families. So again, it's saying be ready for judgment, and be ready to be weighed up and judged and apportioned into which group of people you belong. So when we heard Peter ask at the very beginning the question, are you talking to everybody? Jesus makes it clear, yes, in terms of this, he's talking to absolutely everyone. He then closes this passage at this point, and it's confirmed that he's talking to everyone. It says, he said to the crowd, when you see a cloud rising in the west, immediately say to yourself, it's going to rain, and it does. And when the south wind blows, you say, it's going to be hot today, and it is. Hypocrites, you know how to interpret the appearance of the earth and the sky. How is it that you don't know how to interpret this present time? Why don't you judge for yourselves what is right? As you are going with your adversity to the magistrate, try hard to be reconciled on the way, or your adversity may drag you off to the judge, and the judge could turn you over to the officer, and the officer could throw you into prison. So I tell you, you will not get out until you have paid the last penny. So Jesus here is addressing the wider crowd, and frankly, he's just calling them hypocrites. He points out their ability to read the signs, to predict the weather patterns, but questions why they choose not to discern the spiritual significance of what is playing out before him and the fact that the Messiah is coming. So in emphasis, he's emphasizing the need for spiritual awareness and readiness for everyone for God to appear in their life. Now, in tomorrow's study, we'll see Jesus challenge them further in this, questioning about their very inability to even judge the difference between what is right and wrong. And he advises them, when faced with a conflict or dispute, that they should make every effort to settle it amongst themselves before reaching the judge. So the call here is to settle these matters before we stand before the judgment seat of Christ, or before Christ returns and people are called to be divided as sheep and goats before the great white throne judgment of God. So the underlying theme here is to be prepared and to be ready, as I said at the beginning, in order to avoid these potentially unnecessary, severe consequences for you. And the passage concludes again with this call for readiness. Jesus urges his listeners now, this wider group of people, to settle their matters, to decide where they stand in these things in order they're prepared for that which is imminently coming. So the overarching message of this passage is clear. It's simply be ready because the Lord's going to return, the judgment is coming, and any potential conflicts or disputes among you need to deal with them, and you must remain vigilant and discerning, and of course to be a faithful servant, proactive in the way you live your Christian life. So throughout Luke chapter 12, Jesus covers all of these aspects. He warned us against hypocrisy early on. Do you remember that? We covered it a few days ago. Covetousness, worry. The common thread is a call to be aware and be discerning of these things, and to acknowledge them. And in order to do that and apply that in our lives, that is what truly makes us prepared. So the whole chapter 12, which we've been in for 3 days now, is meant to serve as a sort of cohesive unit with a central theme of being spiritually ready in the face of the challenges like covetousness, like greed, like worry, by overcoming those in order that we might be prepared for the life of service and any returning of the Lord. So the point is this. Clearly, these verses are simply calling us to live in the will of God, and the way we remain ready for his return, whenever that will be by doing the will of God. And that, of course, involves always being ready by watching, waiting, and working. And I'd like to suggest that in the context of the chapter, in order to be in that place of readiness, we also need to be aware of greed and worry and deal with it in the way he told us. So in other words, the best way to conquer the idea of any hypocrisy in our life, any greed in our life, any anxiety in our life, any worry for our life, is simply to be aware of the Lord's return and be busy doing his work until he returns. So are you ready? You know, there's a famous travel writer in the UK who wrote a lot in the 70s and 80s, a guy called Hunter Davis. And he once wrote of his travels to Switzerland, where one day by chance he became upon a beautiful villa and an estate situated on the shores of one of those beautiful Italian northern lakes. He spoke to the gardener, the caretaker, who was an elderly man who saw in the grounds, and he spoke to him for a while, and he found that guy had been serving there for over 30 years. And the guy said, yeah, he was very glad to show him round the gardens. So he asked how long it had been since the master visited, and he said, well, I've been here for over 35 years, and the master has visited 4 times. And our friend Mr. Davis asked him, when was the last time the master visited? And the man replied, 12 years ago. So Davis says, I see, so you always keep the gardens perfect in case the master returns tomorrow. No, said the man, I keep the garden perfect in case the master returns today. Thank you for joining me, I do hope you found that helpful. That's it for today. Another great day spent together studying the Word of God. I do hope you'll be back tomorrow and pick up where you left off. You can make sure you never miss another single episode by subscribing to this podcast wherever it is you get your podcasts from. It won't cost you a penny. You just make sure you'll never miss another single episode. You can also visit us at various places, the Bible Project at buzzsprout.com, and there you'll find a link to the new podcast, which has just gone live, which is my History of the Christian Church podcast. I actually looked at some figures today in the genres of podcasting in terms of popularity. Christian spirituality is number 45 in terms of, sorry, number 49 in the list of top 100 genres. History is number 3. So my way of looking to expand what I consider my ministry is to start a podcast in a history section, which don't don't get me wrong, friends, it is going to be a thoroughly Christian approach to the history of the church, but I'm going to position it in a way that people who are interested in that sort of thing might stumble, if you like, upon what I shall present as evidence as the Holy Spirit working through the lives of 2,000 years of church history and in the lives of some of the greatest thinkers in church history. So if you're interested in taking that journey as well, there's going to be an episode roughly once a week till I can get it up and running. Hopefully there'll be enough interest in it that within a year or so it'll become self-sustaining financially, but that's the seed I'm investing in that for the first 2 years. And if you're interested, come along on that journey as well. You'll find the link there to the History of the Christian Church podcast, also going to be hosted at Buzzsprout. I do hope that's an exciting new thing for you as it is for me. But with that all said, I'll leave it there for today. Why not connect with me on social media, or better still, Patreon? You can become a patron, a supporter of this ministry, and that way you're able to reach out to me personally, and also you can financially support the mission of this ministry if you want. You don't have to, but you can still become a patron, and that way you'll have access to some of the bonus material that I make available over there. And the patron community are always the first to see what I'm doing and get to see behind the curtain a bit about all the other stuff I'm doing in preparation for my preaching commitments, and also the talking and the meetings that I'm involved in terms of philosophy, art, psychology, and lots of other areas where I try and find commonality, intersection points between wholly unchristian worldviews and try and bring biblical perspective and a Christian worldview to challenge people where they are about what they believe. So thank you again for being part of this wonderful call that I've had at this stage of my life and enabling it to take place. And I do trust I'll see you back here again soon. Bye bye for now.